Baruch Hashem, after such an overwhelming, uplifting, but such an overwhelming day, I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Aram and Shane D. Kelman, for dedicating all the Sherman Trushos this month, our Week of Learning sponsors, Dr. and Mrs. Gavant, in honor of Dr. Gavant's reaching an age halfway between his Zikna and Seva, Yaakov and Monica Luxembourg for dedicating the Week of Learning in the merit of a complete and enduring refuah for Eden Shalom Bas Ben Alta Braina, and our Daf Yomi sponsor, Jason Lalonde, in memory of a refuah shleima for Chana Bas Esther Charna. And we thank the Oppenheim Mishpacha, Yitz and Shira Oppenheim, for dedicating this year tonight, as well as tomorrow, in memory of Yitz's grandmother, Gittel Bas Moshe, whose yahrzeit is today, the 10th of Av. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in Nechama. And also with that, let us begin. So we have a beautiful daf ahead of us tonight. Today's daf is Kuf Mem Bav. We're gonna move a little bit this evening. So we're picking up on the bottom of Kuf Mem Hamad Beis 145b. And we are looking up, remember again, we're talking about this discussion that was occurring between these three Rabbanim regarding why is it that the Yom Tovim in Bavel were better than the Yom Tovim in Eretz Yisrael. The Talmidei Chachamim of Bavel dress nicer than Talmidei Chachamim of Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi Yochanan was sleeping or was dozing in the beginning of this conversation. Then he wakes up and was a little bit dismayed about what it is that he heard. So the Gemara says as follows. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So we are on Kuf Mem Hamad Beis 145b, 2, 4, 6 lines up from the bottom. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Ein l'chol kol regal v'regel shelo basa boleshes l'tzipori. Every single Yom Tiv that came, a troop of soldiers used to come to Tzipori. So we'll say, remember, Tzipori is Eretz Yisrael. So it's pointing out, why is it that Yamim Tovim in Eretz Yisrael were not as joyous as in Bavel? Because apparently in Eretz Yisrael they were mamish targeted for attack on Yom Tiv. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Ein l'chol kol regal v'regel shelo bala Tiveria agmon bekamton ubal zemora. And again, so Rabbi Chanina says, every single Yom Tiv in Tiveria, there was an officer, a governor, a troop, the army. There were always attacks. There were always attacks around Yom Tovim. Apparently, the Jewish community in Bavel was not subject to these types of attacks, and therefore Yom Tov in Bavel was more joyous in Eretz Yisrael. And why is it that Mitzuyanin? Why is it that the Talmidei Chacham of Bavel dress nicely? They adorn themselves all elegantly, whereas apparently the Talmidei Chacham of Eretz Yisrael don't do that. Lefi Sha'inan b'nei Mekoman. We'll say this is incredible because Lemaisa, they're not in their natural locale. The Amri Inshi b'masa shmai below masa tosvai. Listen to this phrase. B'masa, in my city, my name is enough. But when I'm not in my city below masa tosvai, I need my clothing. So isn't this an incredible idea? So in Eretz Yisrael, people know the Talmidei Chachamim, so they don't need to adorn themselves in any special garments. Bavel is alien soil. So because it's alien soil, the Talmidei Chachamim have to adorn themselves with beautiful clothing. So the Gemara goes weiter. Haboy mishari Shakov yotzis uparach Yisrael. Tani Rabbi Yosef. Elu Talmidei Chacham shebavel sheosin tzitzin uprachim l'Torah. Because lest you think that the Talmidei Chachamim, because you must remember again, the initial answer that was given is why do the Talmidei Chacham of Bavel have to get all dressed up in nice clothing? So remember again, there was a pretty derogatory answer that was given because they're not real Talmidei Chachamim. So they have to look the part even though they don't really actualize the part. And Rabbi Yochanan is saying that's not true because based on the pasuk says that Talmidei Chacham, the Torah scholars of Bavel, make beautiful flowers for Torah. Why is it that Ovdei Kochavim are impure? Shelo amdu ar Har Sinai. For they did not stand on Har Sinai. Shebisha sheba top of Kuf Mem Vav. Shebisha sheba nachash al chava hitel bazuama. So this goes back to an incredible dynamic. You know, the Rashi already quotes this idea that the Nachash, when he was trying to convince Chava to go ahead and eat from the Eitz Das Tovara, he was doing so because he desired Chava. He desired Chava as a wife. He wanted to take her away from Adam. So apparently there was some level of intimacy between Chava and the Nachash, and as a result, the spirit of impurity was infused into Chava. So what happened? Yisrael sha'amdu ala Har Sinai paskuzu masan. So Klal Yisrael who stood at Har Sinai, so the impurity ceased from them. However, Ovdei Kochavim shelo amdu ala Har Sinai lo paskuzu masan. But Ovdei Kochavim who did not stand on Har Sinai, therefore again did not have the cleansing purification process of Sinaitic revelation, the zuama, the impurity resided within them. Amrli Rav Acha Brei Rav Ashi. Gerim Mai. What about Gerim? So we'll say, so I understand now. I understand that Lemaisa, Klal Yisrael, there are impurities stopped at Har Sinai. Ovdei Kochavim, impurity never stopped. What do Gerim do? Somebody who converts, because somebody who converts, the Gemara is assuming wasn't at Har Sinai. So how did they rid themselves of the Nachash impurity? This is incredible. My Amrle Afagav de'inu lo havu mazlayu havu. Even though the particular ger was not at Har Sinai, his mazel was there. His mazel was there, which means Rabbi say we have Rabbi Yitzchak Abaditcha writes about this actually in his commentary on Shavuos, on Megillah Surus, where the Rebbe writes about this idea that every neshama of every person who was going to convert was also by Maimon Har Sinai, was also there by Sinaitic revelation. And he uses this to explain sometimes the irrational decision that people have to convert. It makes no sense. So the Rebbe says, like, these neshamas were already marked, right? They were already pledged by the nations of the world already by Har Sinai. See here, the Gemara says, Gemara calls it their mazel. Maybe Yitzchak called it the actual neshamas. But the idea is that the neshamas of Gerim participated in Kabbalah Satorah as well, and as such, they were also purged from the impurity of the Nachash. Tichsiv, Eis asher yeshnu po imanu omeid hayom lifnei Hashem Elokeinu, ve'eis asher einenu po omeid imanu hayom. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, the covenant is binding upon those who are standing with us and even those who are not standing with us. The Gemara understands those who are not standing with us, obviously the Pashup Pshat, as it refers to future generations, were all bound by the promise, by the commitment made at Har Sinai. But here the Gemara understands it also refers to Gerim, those who would ultimately eventually join the ranks of Klal Yisrael. Pligad Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. And this argues Rabbi Abba Kahana, because what does Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana say? Then Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, Ad Shlosha Doros Lo Paska Zuama. For the first 3 generations, so the impurity of the Nachash did not leave the Jewish people or the family of Avram Avinu. Why? What happened? Avram Holy Des Yishmael. Supposedly this is incredible. So we always have this kasha in general about how such great people had certain kinds of children. Again, it's an ongoing shaila. But how is it that Avram has a Yishmael and Yitzchak has an Esav? So the Gemara attributes those children to the impurity of the Nachash into Chava. So the Gemara says that's like Avram has a Yishmael, Yitzchak holy this Esav, Yaakov holy Yud Beis Shvatim Shalo Hayabem Shum Dofi. Yitzchak, on the other hand, the Gemara calls this Mitaso Shlema, his bed was complete. All of his children were righteous. So the point over here is Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana is arguing that in fact the impurity, the Zuama of the Nachash, in fact ended by Yaakov Avinu. So you have a machlokes. This is machlokes. When did the impurity of the Nachash leave Am Yisrael? So one opinion says Har Sinai. Second opinion says Yaakov Avinu. Good. Mishnah. Shover Adam Esachavis Lechol Hemena Grogros. So a person could go ahead and smash open a barrel in order to go ahead and retrieve pressed figs. Ubilvachli is Kavin Lasos Kli. So this is an interesting discussion now. This gets into the discussion about opening up utensils. That when opening up a utensil, one must take great care and concern not to fashion an opening. Right? The act of fashioning and opening, according to some, is bona, is building, although some reject the idea that building could apply to kalim, and others explain that it's makeh b'patish. It's like the final hammer blow. So the Mishnah says if you want to open up a barrel in order to go ahead and get out your pressed figs, you can do so, but halacha l'maisa, you have to have kavanah not to make a kli, right? Not to make a formal opening. Ve'inokvin megufa shel chabis. You also can't go ahead and make a hole in the seal of a barrel. We'll discuss exactly what this means. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, if you have a lid that is sealed to the barrel itself, so if you could imagine, you have a barrel, you have a lid to the barrel, and the lid is attached to the barrel with a seal. The Mishnah is seemingly saying you can't make a hole in the seal because the act of making a hole in the seal is fashioning an opening. That's tikkun mana. That's makeh b'patish. So if you want to access the contents of the barrel, you just have to lop off the top. The Chum, on the other hand, say that no, it's mutter. And I will say ultimately again, the Chum say it's mutter because it's not the normal derech. That's not normally how you go ahead and you make an opening in a kli. You should not go ahead and pierce a hole in the side of the barrel. Again, we'll see exactly what that means. If you already have an opening in the barrel, you shouldn't plug the opening with wax. Why not? Because Rabbi say you'll end up smoothing out the wax. Remember, taking a solid mass and smoothing it is a problem of mimareach, of smoothing on Shabbos. For example, that's why, one of the reasons, right, we don't brush our teeth on Shabbos with toothpaste, because the act of taking toothpaste, or for that matter, using stick deodorant, is going ahead and taking something that's solid and smoothing it out. You can't do that on Shabbos. So if you have an opening in the barrel, halacha l'maisa, you can't go ahead and close it off with wax. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maise ba lifnei Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. There was once a story, an episode that happened to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Ba'areif, that's a place. Medina, Rashi says, Va'amar choshishani lo mechata. So apparently, again, somebody brought this issue to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and Rabbi Yochanan about somebody who plugged a hole in a barrel with wax. Rabbi Yochanan said, I think he might have violated in Isser Dorai. So we'll say, what does chus it is to mention Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's name tonight? You know, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is a large reason why we're here today. He's the one who mamish saved Am Yisrael in the Rabbi Akiva, in the aftermath of the second Churban. It was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who instituted so many of the halachos that we have today. Zecher l'mikdash, zecher l'churban. He allowed us to mourn in a healthy way, while at the same time anticipatorily pine for the Bayis Shlishi. Neshama Shtav and Aliyah. Amar Rav Oshia. So start the Gemara. Says Rav Oshia, Lo shanu ela drusos. So says the Gemara, when we say that you could take figs out of a barrel, that's only pressed figs. Ava mifurados lo. But if your barrel contained like loose figs, we'll call it, loose separated figs, you can't open up the top of the barrel. Now, what's happening over here? What the Gemara is saying is like this. The reason that you're allowed to go ahead and take off the top of the barrel to get out pressed figs is, how do you take off the top of a barrel? With a knife. With a knife. Now, since you're already permitted to move the knife in order to go ahead and separate out the figs, you could also go ahead and move the knife in order to go ahead and lop off the top of the barrel. But if, for example, the figs themselves were loose figs, not pressed together, then you would not need a knife. And because you don't need a knife for the figs, you would not have license to move the knife to lop off the top of the barrel. Now, both say this is reflective of the view of Rabbi Nechemiah, because Rabbi Nechemiah, as we're going to say, holds that a kli, a utensil, can only be moved on Shabbos if it's going to be used in its primary fashion. To which the Gemara says, "Umifurados lo." Is that true? If the figs aren't pressed together, you can't pick up a knife to lop off the top of the barrel. Why not? Meisvei. You could bring a barrel of wine and lop off the top of the barrel with a sword. And you could go ahead and serve the wine to the guests, and there's no problem. So we'll say, so you see that you're allowed to move the knife, even if you don't need the knife for the contents, but you just need the knife to remove the lid. Hahi Rabbanan. So that reflects the view of the Rabbanan. We'll say, because the Rabbanan say that halacha l'maisa, any kli could be used, even if not for its intended purpose, as long as the purpose that you're using it for is mutter. Versus Rabbi Nechemiah. Rabbi Nechemiah halacha l'maisa holds masnis Rabbi Nechemiah. Our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Nechemiah, who holds that a kli or utensil can only be moved on Shabbos for its primary purpose. So therefore, again, if you have pressed figs, I'm going to need the knife anyway. So once I'm allowed to pick up the knife for the pressed figs, once it's already in my hand, I can lop off the top of the barrel. So I don't understand, why does Rabbi Oshia feel compelled to set up the Mishnah according to Rabbi Nechemiah and therefore dafka with pressed figs? Let him set it up as a case of where the figs are separate and let it reflect the view of the Rabbanon. Amarava masnisa kishisa, because the Mishnah was problematic for Rabbi Oshia. My area the tani grogros. Why did the Mishnah dafka choose grogros? Why did the Mishnah have to say that it's a barrel filled with pressed figs? Why not just say it's a barrel filled with figs? Listni peros, just say fruit. Rather, you have to say that the Mishnah in Achinami just reflects the view of Rabbi Nechemiah. Rabbi say, so therefore, again, not really halacha l'maisa. I mean, it's halacha l'maisa. You are permitted to go ahead and pick up a knife and lop off the top of a barrel to get the contents in it. You are allowed to do that. But again, the way Rabbi Oshia is setting it up is, it reflects the view of Rabbi Nechemiah, and the reason you could take the knife to lop off the top of the barrel is because you're permitted to pick up the knife in the first place because you needed to cut apart pressed figs. But according to the Rabbanan, it doesn't matter what the contents of the barrel are. A knife can be moved even if not for its primary usage. Tanya Chada, Choslo shall grogros, v'shal tmarim, matir umafkia v'chotech. So we'll say, so one brisa says as follows, Choslos. So Rashi points out over here, Choslos is a basket. Is a basket. So if you have a basket that you normally use to hold figs, right, or dates, matir, you can untie the basket. Mafkia, you could unravel it. V'chotech, and you could cut it apart. V'tanya idach, another brisa says, matir, you are permitted to untie it. Avalo mafkia, but you can't unravel it. V'lo chotech, and you can't cut it. Lo kasha, and again, once again, it's not a contradiction. Harabanan harabi Nechemiah. Two different opinions. Disanya Rabbi Nechemiah Omer afilu tarvad va'afilu talis va'afilu sakin. even if you have a spoon, or even if you have a cloak, or even if you have a knife. Ein nitalin elo letzorech tashmishon. We also remember again, this is Rabbi Nechemiah's shita, which is a very dramatic shita in Hilchos Muktzah, which is that a utensil can only be moved, not just for a permitted purpose, but for its singularly designated purpose. Even though you could use a particular utensil a number of permitted ways, Rabbi Nechemiah only permits you to move it for its particularly designated purpose. Can you go ahead and lunge a spear into the side of a barrel in order to make an opening? Is that permitted? So what's the shaila? Do we say lepischa kamechabin va'aser? Do we say, well, your intention is to fashion an opening, and fashioning an opening in a barrel is problematic on Shabbos? O dilma la'ayin yofek kamechabin v'shari. Or maybe really all you want is what? Really what you just want to do is create a larger opening so as to allow the contents to flow out a little bit better, in which case it's not aser. We assume that if somebody is jabbing a spear into the side of a barrel, his intention is to fashion an opening, and therefore it will be aser. Maybe Adam chavish shal yayin umatiz rosha b'sayif. Shmuel says a person could bring a barrel of wine and lop off the top of the barrel with a sword. Shabbos says so again. Hasam vade la'ayin yofa kamechabin. Shabbos say again, if you're lopping off the entire top, then obviously your intention is to be able to get more of the contents out faster. Hacha im isa de la'ayin yofa kamechabin liftuche miftach. But I both say in the case of the spear, if your intention was to just make a larger opening, there are easier ways to make a larger opening than jabbing a spear into the side of the barrel. Good. Shabbos says, so again, you see the theme that's developing, that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and take off the top of the lid of a barrel on Shabbos. Shabbos says, see, even though again, there was the barrel, the lid, and the lid was attached to the barrel with a seal around it, you could remove that seal in order to go ahead and open up the barrel on Shabbos. What's the logic? The logic is very simple. Halacha l'maisa, remember again, that is omed to be open. It's supposed to be open. So because it's supposed to be opened, therefore halacha l'maisa, you're permitted to reopen it on Shabbos. So we'll say, you understand this sugya. I know I still owe everybody the halacha l'maisa on the schita sugya, which we're about to, but understand this sugya, by the way, this is the sugya of opening bottles and opening cans and opening containers on Shabbos. That's the shaila we're dealing with over here. Let's go right there. A nokvin megufa, so you can't go ahead and pierce the seal. Amravuna machlokes lemala. The machlokes is only ultimately again at the top of the barrel, the top of the seal. Aval minatzad divrei kol aser. But if you do it on the side, everyone agrees that halach l'maisa will be aser. V'hainu diktani lo yikabena mitzida. And that's what it means when it says you should not pierce it on the side. Rav Chisda says no, machlokes minatzad. The machlokes is when you pierce it on the side. Aval al gaba, but to pierce it on top. Divrei hakol mutter. Everyone agrees it will be mutter. And when we said in the Mishnah that you should not go ahead and pierce it on the side, what is that referring to? That's not talking about the seal. Hasam begufa dechavis. That's talking about the actual barrel itself. Tan Rabbanon ein nokvin nekev chadish b'Shabbos. So now, Bosa, listen to this. You cannot create a new opening in the barrel on Shabbos. Very important halacha. You can't create a new opening in a barrel on Shabbos. Vim bala hosif mosif. But if you want to add on to an already existing opening, that's permitted. V'yesh omrim, others explain, ein mosifin, you can't add on. V'shavin shenokvin nakav yashan lechatchila. Supposed to listen to this. So two versions here. In the first version, you cannot make a new opening in a barrel on Shabbos, but if you want to enlarge an already existing opening, that's permitted. In the yesh omrim version, yesh omrim, ein mosifin, you cannot add on to an already existing opening, but what can you do? However, v'shavin shenokvin nekav yashan lechatchila. What you can do is, if you have an old opening that it appears like was plugged up, you can unplug it. You can unplug it on Shabbos. So says the Gemara. Maishna minekev chadash delo. So we'll say, so I don't understand. So why is it that you can't go ahead and make a new opening to come attacking Pischa? Because obviously the act of making a new opening is making a new opening. And fashioning an opening is a problem of either binyan, building, or tikkun mana, makiv patisht. So the Gemara says, 1 second, asufei nami come attacking Pischa. But if you enlarge or you add on to an already existing opening, is that not also creating an opening? Amarabba Dvar Torah, listen to this, Rabbi say, Midaraisa, Kol Pesach she'eno asur lahachnis ulahotzi eno Pesach. This is actually quite fascinating. In reality, halacha l'maisi only chayiv d'oraisa for making an opening in a kli on Shabbos if the opening is large enough for things to come in and things to come out. However, the Rabbanon hu de gazer mishum lul shal tarnagolin. The Rabbanon came along and said that even for a smaller opening, it's still going to be asur because of the case of the chicken coop. The Rabbanon said, now, what's the issue with the chicken coop? The Gemara says, "Da avid li'iluye yavira ulafuke havla." Interestingly enough, a chicken coop, they used to make a hole in the coop, I guess a hole in the side of the coop, and the goal was to allow air in, but also to allow noxious air to go out. V'bala hosif mosif asufi. Shabbos say, and if you were to go ahead and enlarge that hole, vaday below shal tarnagolim lo asila asufe. Shabbos say, so ultimately, again, really, midarais only chayiv ultimately for making a hole that's large enough for stuff to go in and stuff to come out. They said that you even chayiv for making a smaller hole because a smaller hole resembles the hole of a chicken coop. But here's what's interesting. You see, people don't realize that. People don't understand that the goal of the hole of a chicken coop is to allow air in and out. They only think that it's small enough to allow things in one direction. So Chazal therefore legislated and said, you know what? You really shouldn't go to make any kind of hole. But when it comes to a hole that already exists, the Rabbanan had no problem of allowing you to enlarge that hole. Why? Because no one's going to confuse that with the case of the chicken coop. Lo asila sufe. Why not? Amud beis mishum riksha. Because I will say no one's going to go ahead and assume that because you could enlarge an already existing hole, that they're going to come to enlarge the hole, the opening in a chicken coop. Why is that? Because Lamaisa is only so large you want to make the opening in the chicken coop because of riksha. Riksha, I will say, are rodents. Rashi says sheretz kigon nemaya chulda. So they don't want. They don't want animals to get into the coop. So the Gemara says omrim ein mosif, and others say no, you can't even add on to an already existing opening. Zimnin to lo takne meikara. Because sometimes he didn't properly fashion the opening from the beginning. And you will come to go ahead and fix the opening even more. So we'll say ultimately again, Rav Nachman said the halacha is like the Yesh Omrim, namely that halacha l'maisi you can't make a new hole in a barrel, and you can't really even expand an already existing hole in the barrel as well. Shavin shenokvin nakav yashin chatchila, but everyone agrees that you could reopen an old opening. So apparently you had an opening, the opening was stopped up. You could reopen that new opening. That's only true, we'll say. This is actually very interesting. There would be sometimes if you had a hole in a barrel of wine, let's say, you would want to plug up that hole, not because you're afraid of the contents pouring out, but because you don't want the aroma of the wine to escape. So says Rabbi Yehuda, when do we say that if you have a hole that was plugged up, you could unplug it? That's only a hole that was plugged in order to maintain the wine aroma inside. That you could unplug. But if you went ahead and you had a hole that was plugged up in order to strengthen the barrel, Rashi says, so let's say you had a hole that was allowing the liquid to escape. You wanted to plug that hole in order to maintain the liquid, then then I will say if you plugged up that hole, you cannot unplug that on Shabbos. So I will say, how do you tell the difference between a hole that was made? So I will say the shamer means to guard the aroma. Lechazik means to strengthen the utensil. How do you know the difference? It's very simple. A hole that is above the wine level. Obviously, again, that hole was plugged in order to maintain the aroma. You can unplug that hole on Shabbos. However, below the wine level, halacha l'maisa, again, that was clearly made lechazik to strengthen the utensil to prevent leakage. That you cannot reopen on Shabbos. Rava Amar, no, it could very well be Rava says that even even a hole that was at wine level and then plugged up could still be considered to be just safeguarding aroma. So what's the type of hole that was plugged up to strengthen the barrel? So we'll say that's the type of hole below the dregs. Below the dregs of wine. Rashi lemata min hashmarim. Eitzel shulyav shekol kovet hayayim nishama. So we'll say it's interesting. Apparently the way it works is, you'd have wine, then you'd have dregs in the barrel, but apparently there was often some amount of wine underneath the dregs as well. So if you had a hole, you plugged up the hole underneath the dregs, then I will say that is clearly an indispensable plug. Because if that plug is not there, then what happens? Then what happens? The contents simply pour out. That's called lechazek. That's the type of opening that you could not reopen on Shabbos. Amalei Abai l'Rava, so Abai says Rava, there's a brayso that supports you. Totally different discussion. Supposed to listen to this. If you have a home, and let's say the doorway in the home is sealed up. But I will say, but what happened over here? What happened? So the Gemara, actually nothing happened yet. So the Gemara says as follows: you have a home that opens up into a chutzner, or multiple homes which open up into a chutzner. So the halacha is, Rashi points out, every home is automatically allocated the dalit amis in front of the doorway, right? So however the rest of the chutzner is divided up and usage is divided up, you are always automatically granted the dalit amis in front of your door, which makes sense. I will say that is true even if your door is sealed. However, paratz lo pitzimin. We'll say, what happens if the doorway was removed? What happens if the doorway was removed and that area just sealed in? Ein lo dalet amis. So we'll say at that point in time, it's as if the doorway does not exist. Once you remove the doorposts, the doorway does not exist, and therefore you no longer have the dalet amis in front of that area. So we'll say here the chilik, even though functionally there's no difference between case 1 and case 2, right? In both cases 1 and 2, what's happened? You've lost the use of the doorway. In case number 1, so the doorway is there, it's just sealed up. In case number 2, the doorway is no longer there and it's sealed up. In case number 1, as long as the doorway is there, you still get the dalet amis in front of the doorway, even though it's not a functional entranceway. In case number 2, once the doorpost was removed, halacha l'maisa, everything is removed. It's no longer considered to be a door. You don't get the dalet amis. Similarly, bayis sasum elementami kol saviva. So you know, say if you have a mace, a corpse inside of a home, and the doorway is sealed up, that doorway keeps the tumah inside. The tumah can't spread. Paratz that's petzimav. But if you remove the doorposts of the home, then what? Netame kol saviva. Then the tumah actually, interestingly enough, spreads all around. And I will say, so what does this have to do with our brayso? Because remember again, what the Gemara was saying was as follows. Rava was saying that halacha l'maisa, the type of opening which is indispensable to the actual functionality of the barrel. If you seal that up, you cannot reopen that on Shabbos, because the act of reopening that is like creating a brand new opening, versus an opening that was stopped up that is not really so essential to the functioning of the barrel. Maybe it's essential to or maybe it's good for the quality of the wine. That type of opening, if it was plugged up, could be reopened. And the point that Abaye is making over here is, you see, when something is essential, it becomes an indispensable part of the entity. So a doorway is essential to a home. Once you remove the doorway, what happens? Essentially, the structure loses its identity as a home. Gufsa, what about gufsa? So I'll say, listen to this. Rashi says, spigot. You want to go ahead and make a spigot. So I'll say, how did you make a spigot, a Talmudic spigot? You would insert the hollow reed into the barrel. So can you go ahead and make a spigot on Shabbos? A spigot on Shabbos. So Rav said you can't do it. Shmuel says that it's mutter. So we'll say everyone agrees that lechatchila you cannot fashion a spigot on Shabbos. Everyone agrees with that. If you had a spigot and the spigot fell out, everyone agrees that you can put it back. So keep pligi. So we'll say, what's the machlokes case? Dechaticha or dechascha v'lo metakna, where you cut the spigot. So we'll say obviously you have to like shave down the reed, but you didn't fully complete it. Man da'asr, so the one who says you cannot insert such a spigot into the barrel, will say da'asr gazrinan dama asila mechtach lechatchila, is nervous about using an incomplete spigot out of fear that you will come to complete it on Shabbos. Man deshari lo gazrinan, versus the second opinion that says that it's mutter, is not worried. So even though the spigot is not totally complete, we're not worried that you're going to shave it down and complete it on Shabbos. Kit tanoi, in reality this is a machlokes tanoim. Ein chotchin shvo feres biyamtiv. You can't go ahead and literally cut a tube on Shabbos. On Shabbos, we'll say this is the same idea. Shvo feres, in this case, this tube is also a spigot. And all the more so you can't make it on Shabbos. Nafla, what happens if the spigot was in the barrel on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, then it fell out? Machzir no so b'Shabbos ve'in tzarech lo b'Yom Tov. So we'll say very interesting halacha. If the spigot was in and it fell out, you could put it back. So far everybody's agreeing. Halacha l'maisa, you cannot go ahead and lechatchila go ahead and fashion and insert a spigot on Shabbos. If it was there and it fell out, you could put it back. Rabbi Yoshia mekel. Rabbi Yoshia is mekel. So Gemara says, Rabbi Yoshia is mekel on what? Rabbi Yoshia Ahiyah. Ilema Aresha, if you want to say that he's making on the first case, so the Gemara says, how could that be? Rabbi Yoshia is going to allow you to fashion a spigot and to actually put it in on Shabbos. How come attacking mana? You're fixing something, right? You are completing a utensil. Ela seifa. Rather, it has to be Rabbi Yoshia's makel on the seifa. But on the seifa, Tanakama nami mishra kashari. The Tanakama is also makel, right? That Allah lamaisa, if the spigot was in and it fell out, you can put it back. Ela dichaticha v'lo metakna. Ikavena. Rather, it must be that the machlokes in Rabbi Yoshia and the Tanakama is what happens if you have a spigot that was cut to size but not fully finished. So again, apparently, like I guess also the way it would happen is you would make the spigot, you'd put it in the utensil, and then what you would realize is the additional, I guess, like shaving or altering of it that you would have to do to make it fit perfectly. So can you go ahead and utilize a spigot that was cut but was not completed? So what happened? Mar Savar Gazrina. So one opinion says Tanakama was that you can't use it because we're afraid that you may come to finish it off on Shabbos. Umar Saraboshe says we're not worried about it. You can use it on Shabbos. Good. Darash Rav Shisha Breid Rav Idi Mishmeid Rav Yochanan Halacha Rav Yoshia. That the halacha follows Rav Yoshia. Namely, Rabbi say that as long as the spigot was finished, right, even though it wasn't totally cut down to size, we allow you to use it on Shabbos, and we are confident that you are not going to finish shaving it, or finish forming it on Shabbos. Im Haisa Nekuba. So we'll say, so remember again, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that if the barrel had an opening, lo yetin ala shaiva, you should not go ahead and put wax in the opening, lest you come to go ahead and smooth out the wax. So it says the Gemara will say, watch this. Im haisen akuva mishcha. So we'll say, forget about wax for a moment. What about oil? They both say, now the oil in this case is thick oil, like almost like a congealed type of oil. So can you use a thicker oil to go ahead and fill in the opening? So Rav Asr Shmuel Shari. Rav said you can't. Shmuel said you can. Man da Asr, the one who says that it's Asr Gazrinim Mishum Shaiva, is nervous that if we allow you to use thicker oil, you'll come to use wax. Now I will say, remember, even thicker oil is still a liquid. So there's no issue of memarech. Smoothing out is only an issue by a solid. So on a technical level, there's no issue using the oil. Rav says it's usher because we're afraid if we let you use the oil, you're going to come to use the wax. But the one who says you can use the oil is not concerned. No, just because you let you use oil doesn't mean you come to use wax. Only Rav Shmuel, Bar Rav Chanan Rav Yosef, Beferish Amrat Lan Mishmei Derav Mishcha Shari. You told us explicitly in the name of Rav that Allah Lamaisa, the use of oil on Shabbos will be mutter. So we'll say it's interesting that Rambam actually codifies like Shmuel that Allah Lamaisa won't let you use thick oil lest you come to use wax. Amar Tavus Rishba Amar Shmuel. So we'll say Tavus Rishba, that's his name. So what happened? The Gemara says Tavus Rishba saying to Shmuel, Hai Tarfa da Asa Aser. Let's listen to this. Tarfa da Asa, Rashi says, Loses Allah shal hadas binakav hachabis sha'Allah asui kimarze v'hayayin zov derachsham. Let's listen to this. You can't take a leaf on Shabbos and use it as like a channel. Channel is the wrong word. Marzev literally is a gutter. So we'll say, if you can imagine the image over here, is you have a hole in the barrel, but you need a way to get the wine from the barrel to my glass. So what do? I take like almost like a funnel, right? I go ahead and I take a leaf. I'm going to use leaf as like a gutter to go ahead and take the wine from the barrel into my cup. So Tavus Rish is saying to Shmuel, it's usher to do that. So why? My timer, Rabbi Yirmi Midifti Amar Gzer Mishum Marzev. It's a concern about constructing a marzev. It's a marzev. So we'll say, so again, constructing a gutter on Shabbos is actually problematic, right? It could be a problem of makir patish, it could be a problem of bona, depending on how or where you're constructing the gutter. So we're concerned, so I'll say, if you can imagine, because I guess image-wise, that leaf looks like a gutter, right? The wine is flowing down from the gutter, from the leaf into the cup. So we're concerned that if we allow you to use the leaf, you're going to come to make a gutter on Shabbos. Rav Ashi Amar, Gezer Shem Yiktom. Rav Ashi says, no, it's much simpler. We don't want you using a leaf as a gutter on Shabbos. Why? Or as a funnel on Shabbos, because we're afraid that if we allow you to use it, what's going to happen? You're going to pluck it off the tree. My benav. So we'll say, what's the nafkamina? So ikabenayu dekatim umanchi. So we'll say, obviously the nafkamina would be in a case where the leaf is already detached from the tree. If the leaf is already detached from the tree, so again, if your concern is you're going to come to detach it, it's already detached. But if your concern is halacha lemaisa, that you may come to God and construct a gutter, that might apply even in the case of a detached leaf. Beis Sadja, let's listen to this interesting case. What about, now we'll say, Beis Sadja is felt padding. Felt padding. So Rashi says, Levadin shekorin platrosh, va'asuyin lekaplan tachtov b'makom hakarakis. Let's listen to this. What would you normally use this felt padding for? You would use it for underneath a pillow or underneath a mattress. So it gave extra cushioning, extra padding underneath a pillow or mattress. Rabbi said, listen to this. The shaila is, can you go ahead and wear this out on Shabbos into the Rosh Hashanah, wear it as an article of clothing? So again, the padding was long. So can you go ahead and wear it as an article of clothing on Shabbos? Or if you were to do that, would that be an Isser Da'araisa of Hotzah? So Rav says you cannot wear it out on Shabbos. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Rav Asr lahabio derech malbush derech Rosh Hashanah kishum utaf bo. You cannot wear that out on Shabbos. You can't. You're not allowed to wear that out on Shabbos. Ushmuel shari. Shmuel says that it's permitted to wear it as an article of clothing. So says the Gemara, let's qualify this. With soft felt, everyone agrees that it's mutter, because apparently that would be a little bit more normally worn as a garment. With rough felt, everyone agrees that it's aser, because no one would ever wear that as an article of clothing. Where's the machlokes? The in between felt, it's not too rough and it's not too soft. Man da aser mechsi kemasui. So the one who says that you can't wear it out on Shabbos because it's not really an article of clothing, it's padding for pillows and cushions, and therefore it looks like you're carrying a burden. And the one who says that it's mutter says, no, sometimes people do wear this. And even though it's not the normal use for this felt padding, halach l'mais is not a masui and it's mutter. I will say, interestingly enough, Rav's position that it's aser, interestingly enough, was never explicitly stated by Rav, but was inferred by an action. I will say, what happened? This is incredible. The Rav Ikla, listen to this story. With this, we're going to end. The Rav Ikla lahu asra, de lo habili Ravcha. So we'll say Rav was once invited somewhere to a particular city. He was invited to someone's home, and there was not enough room for all of the guests in the house. So what did Rav do? Nafik Yosef bekarmelis. He went and he sat outside, and he was sitting in a karmelis. Aisule beisadja. So one of the students brought him some felt padding. They will say, now watch this. So they brought him felt padding. So how did the student get the felt padding? From the house to Rav, he wore it. He wore it as a garment. So what happened? So the Gemara says, Lo Yosef, Rav refused to use it. He wouldn't sit down on it. Man dechaza, savar mishum de beisadja, aser. So we'll say, the one who saw Rav refuse the felt padding assumed that what was Rav's position, that you cannot wear felt padding as clothing, and therefore he felt that the person who brought out the padding did something illegal, and Rav did not want to benefit from an illegal act on Shabbos. Velohi, but says that's not what happened. That's not what happened. The Rav achruze machriz beisadja shari. So in reality, Rav actually felt that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and wear felt padding out on Shabbos because it could pass as a garment. So why didn't he want to sit on the padding? What was the problem? One of the Talmidim brought Rav some felt padding to sit on out of kavod to Rav. What was the problem? There were other Rabbanim there, and there wasn't enough felt padding for everyone. So Rav felt awkward sitting on the felt padding when the other Rabbanim would not have felt padding. And the Gemara says, Umanin, who are these other Rabbanim who were there? Bef Kahana v'Ravasi. So we'll see here this amazing Gemara, an incredible Gemara. So how was Rav's shita gleaned? Right? You have Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav says you can't go ahead and wear beis sadja. You can't wear felt padding on Shabbos, and if you do so, it's aser, right? You can't do it. And Shmuel says it's mutter. And probably says the Gemara, just so you should know, Rav never said this, but we inferred it. What did we infer it from? Because Rav was once in a Carmelist. One of the Talmidei Chachamim wore felt padding from the house to the Carmelist, and Rav wouldn't sit on the felt padding. What does that show you? That Rav holds that beis sadja felt padding cannot be worn as a garment. But in fact, says the Gemara, that's not what happened. Rav says it's mutter to wear felt padding out on Shabbos. But what happened? It was very nice that the Talmud brought it out for Rav, but there were other Rabbanim who wouldn't have, and Rav would not sit on the felt padding if the other Rabbanim did not have. We'll say two incredible lessons. First of all, the incredible anava, the incredible humility of Rav, that he did not in any way want to look more chashiv in front of his colleagues, and also an incredible lesson in not jumping to conclusions based on what you see. Sometimes we see things in life. We see people do things. We see people say things. We see situations, and we think we have it all figured out. all figured out. I know exactly what he meant. I know exactly why he did it. I know exactly. I've got it all. I have it all figured out. And then I say things, do things, and take actions based on my assumed understanding of the circumstances. And it's happened to all of us in life, where then when you find out the real story, you realize that you are wrong. And sometimes we take pretty damaging actions based on assumptions we make. And when we find out that they were wrong assumptions, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to dial it back. Here the Gemara says, we thought Rav's Shita was one way because ultimately of a Maisa, but it turned out that Rav's actions were actually motivated by something totally different. Incredible Musar Haskell. Be very, very careful before you pass judgment on people and before you think that you have the right insight into any life situation. Because so often there's a sub-narrative. There's a subtext. There's something else that's going on. I don't have all of the facts. If we live life that way, then we won't jump to conclusions about situations, and most and more importantly, we won't jump to erroneous conclusions about one another. All right, I'll say a shekayach. We'll stop over here for tonight. Tzidkas HaTzadik tomorrow morning at 5:45. When else do you have the great schos to get 2 dapim within 8 hours of each other? Absolutely incredible. Tzidkas HaTzadik 5:40. Sorry? I said we just start now. Just start now. Just now. I know, but then it defeats the purpose.